everyone, my name is Reggie and welcome to my channel. Today I will be sharing with you my February wrap-up. So these are all of the books I read in the month of February. In the month of February I read 7 books, which if you watched last month's wrap-up, I read 19 books last month. So 7 is quite a step down, but February was one of the most stressful months I've ever had in my entire life. I got into a car accident, I had to buy a new car within the course of like a couple of days. So that was just a very stressful experience. Not really fun. No one was hurt. Everything was fine. We got a new car. It's great and everything's hunky-dory. But it was like intense. The month was short and intense. So I'm pretty happy with reading 7 books. And the best part about this is I really enjoyed, to some extent, every book I read this month. So I still chalk that up to a huge win, and I'm like way ahead of my reading goal for the year. So really, there are no losers here except for my old car. If you're new to my channel, I really would like if you subscribed. I post new bookish videos on this channel every single week, and it's a really good time, I believe, and I hope you do too. And if you enjoy this video, also go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you're new around my channel and you don't know, I start my wrap-ups with the book I rated least in the month, work my way up to my favorite that leads some anticipation to my favorite book of the month, and also make sure we end on a positive note. So if we're starting with my least favorite book of the month, that would be King of Scars, which I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. I actually did enjoy my time reading this. I had pretty mixed feelings about it, but overall I enjoyed it. I would consider a 3-star a good review for me. It just means that like I enjoyed it, but I also had some pretty major flaws with it as well, but they weren't flaws to like make me hate the book. Like, I enjoyed my time reading it. It wasn't perfect. It was still fun. That's pretty much King of Scars in a nutshell. If you don't know, King of Scars is the 3rd series in the Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo. So we have the Grisha trilogy, the Six of Crows duology, and now the, I believe it's King of Scars duology. I have a video review all about this, so I won't go into it in depth, and I definitely recommend checking out that video review. But long story short, I think there wasn't enough Nikolai in a book about Nikolai. I think the pacing was awful, and I think the side characters were great. Next book we have, I finished on the last day of the month, or the day before that, something really close to the end of the month. I enjoyed my time reading this. I buddy read it with Alyssa at Pucks and Paperback. That's Midnight at the Electric by Jodi Lynn Anderson. I really like Jodi Lynn Anderson's writing, and I enjoyed Tiger Lily when I first read it years ago. So I was really excited to pick this up when it first came out, like in 2017 or something like that, but I never got around to it. So finally getting around to it, years later, how on brand for me. I really enjoyed this. I gave it a 3.5 stars. I thought it was really fun. I kind of expected a little bit more from it going in, to be completely honest. This is told in 3 kind of parts, perspectives, whatever you want to call it. And the first is from Adri, and she is living in the future. I think it's like 2022, 21 something. Will it tell me? 2065. So she is living in 2065 and Earth is not doing so hot, mainly because of like global warming stuff. And so she is part of one of the first people who's going to colonize Mars, and she's going to be there forever. She's moving to Mars basically. And so this follows her last days on Earth. During her last days on Earth, she is spending time with a long distance relative that she's never met before she goes to Mars forever. While she's there, she finds a journal from a girl who lived there during the Dust Bowl, and in that journal she finds letters to a girl who lived in London. So we have letters, journals, a person living their life, all kinds of different like storytelling devices within this, different timelines, really strong, impactful, interesting women doing really interesting things. And Adri, our main character, who is the one going to Mars in the most like futuristic timeline, is trying to like read all these stories and figure out the missing puzzle pieces and just like discover what happened in these women's lives. And it's so fascinating, very interesting, beautiful. So it's kind of like a soft sci-fi mixed with a contemporary, mixed with a historical fiction. It's got a lot going on in terms of genres and like even narrative devices. I don't think that like took away from the book at all. I actually think that strengthened it. That is what it is. And like I said, I really love Jodi Lynn Anderson's writing. But what I loved about Jodi Lynn Anderson's first book that I read was how emotional it made me, and I didn't get that same kind of emotional attachment here. I enjoyed one of the story plots the most. It was the girls who were living in the Dust Bowl. The other 2 didn't really wow me, and the like kind of how they all tie in didn't surprise me. So overall, 3.5, it was really enjoyable, really fun, really good, but I kind of wanted more from it, expected more from it, and had kind of, in my opinion, been led to believe there would be more from it, and I just didn't get that. Next up, I have We Were 8 Years in Power by Tanashi Coates, which I had a blast reading for multiple reasons. This was not on my February TBR, and the reason I decided to pick it up is because I got to go to an event at the local university near me. I got to go to the event he was at, and it was an incredible experience. So I wanted to read this book because I've read his other works, but I haven't read this. Tanashi Coates, if you don't know, is a prominent, now prominent kind of writer. He is like a black intellect, they call him. He's a very smart, well-spoken, articulate, well-thought person who talks a lot about like black issues. And when Obama was in presidency, he was writing for The Atlantic. He does a lot of writing still. He's a journalist, nonfiction writer mostly. What really put him on the map, besides his work with The Atlantic, was his memoir that came out, I think, in 2015 called Between the World and Me, about it's a letter written to his son about his experiences growing up black and his experiences with the black body. And I read that and loved it, and I would love to reread it now that I've heard him speak and heard him speak of that book in a different context. But anyways, I'm talking about this book because I read this because I hadn't read it yet. And this is, circling back because I really got off track there, this is 8 stories basically that Tanashi wrote for The Atlantic when Obama was in office. And he doesn't just have the articles reprinted in here. He also has a foreword before each of them, talking kind of about his headspace, what was happening in the world, what was happening with him, what was happening with Obama, what was happening with all the things around the article he wrote. So you have a lot of context reading these, you know, years later. And it was very fascinating and very interesting. I really loved it. I definitely recommend this book. I think it was a really fascinating look at someone's like rise and prominence in like being an intellectual or just a person who's well known. Because in a lot of the forwards you get to see Tanashi kind of grow and his impact and his following, and the people who are reading his articles, like more and more people are doing so, and you can kind of see how that affects him in these like forwards. You can see how the world is kind of changing in these forwards. It's super fascinating. But like hearing him speak was one of the highlights of the month. It was so amazing. And yeah, it was so much fun. I'll insert a couple pictures here because it was fantastic. But this book was so good. Definitely recommend it. I think I gave it a 4 stars. Next up, we have a book that I really loved, but makes me really sad. And not because it's a sad book, though it is. Anyways, it is All American Poise by Jason Reynolds and Brian Keeley. What makes me sad about this book is that I was supposed to go to a Jason Reynolds and Brandon Keeley signing, and that was the day I got into the accident. So I didn't get to go because I didn't have a car to get there. It's really disappointing. But I read this book in anticipation of that event, and this book is so, so good. So there's always that. I gave it a 4.5 stars, and this is a Black Lives Matter kind of inspired book. So it's about a boy who has an altercation with a white police officer. He's unarmed. He isn't shot or killed, but he is heavily injured. He is in the hospital for days, maybe a week, maybe more. This is told in dual timeline, so it's partly from the perspective of the kid who was injured by the police officer and partly from the perspective of a white boy who's at the same school and somewhat related to the white police officer, and it's their different perspectives of what's happening around them and how the community is reacting to this news and how like protests are starting to become a thing. Super fascinating to see this because we get the perspective of a kid who thought he was doing the right thing, wasn't doing anything wrong, and how this movement around him and him being alive for it, because if you think about like The Hate U Give or things like that, those are focused on characters who are still alive because the person that these protests are around is dead. The police officer in most of these instances shot and killed that person. So in this book, our main character is still alive, and he's dealing with how it feels like to see himself on the news and people talking about him and people making him into this like thing to protest about and talk about. And then you see the other perspective of this white kid who's kind of seen things for the first time in this different perspective and doesn't know how to deal with them and like trying to grasp the world around him in this new and nuanced way. And it's very, very good. I really enjoyed both perspectives, and I enjoyed this book a lot. I think it's not my favorite in the subgenre of like activism books, but it was very, very good. I gave it a solid 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Saga Volume 9 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, and this book gutted me, and I'm actually so glad there's like a year break in between the next issue because I can't deal with this ending. I'm gonna need some time to recover. But this was so good. Binging these was such a service to me. I reread the first 8 in January, and I read this one in February, and it was so good, and I loved it. And I love these characters, and I love everything about this, and I love that these stories hold no punches back. they like just put everything out there for you, and I love the authors and creators and the artists for that. They really just delve into this world so genuinely well, and I love it. I also did a series review of this bad boy, so if you're interested in that, I'll link it in the eye. Definitely go ahead and check it out. So that's a series review for all of Saga. It really breaks down the series into 5 reasons why I think you should read it, but really you should read it. And if you've started reading Saga and stopped, you should continue and finish it because it's so worth it. But yeah, it is going to be a painful experience for you. Next up, I have Becoming by Michelle Obama, which I loved. This is Michelle Obama's memoir, and I really enjoyed seeing a different look inside of the First Lady, a person who I admire and respect and love so much. She is a fantastic person in my opinion. I really look up to her. I think she is amazing, and this book was just what I needed at the time I read it because I was feeling very like down and dour and just not happy. I wasn't like in a great place necessarily. Yeah, February was really a bad month for me because that was even before the car accident thing. But anyway, I just wasn't feeling so great, and I picked this book up, and it was so inspiring and rich and like beautiful, and I loved it. And it's not trying to like necessarily be a super inspiring book necessarily. It's just telling you like it is. And Michelle, coming from her background and her experience and explaining her perspective on things that happen and her life before things happen and everything. And I just loved her so much. And the way she told the story was beautiful. I really enjoyed it. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars because, like I said, when I picked it up, it was exactly what I needed to hear, exactly what I needed to consume. And it just hit a mark with me. I loved it. And the last book I have to talk about today is the favorite I read in this month, and I do plan on doing a review of it, though I don't know what I'm gonna do because every time I try to like write down bullet points of my thoughts on this book, I can't even deal with it. So I don't know if I'll actually be able to get a review to you, but I'm trying really hard. And that's The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. If you don't know, this is a modern classic. I consider a classic. It's like 50 years old now, maybe 60. And this is about a girl who's at an internship in New York, and as she's in New York, her mental state starts to deteriorate, and it's about her going to seek help for that. She goes to a mental facility, and there's treatments that are very much of the time, which are not very good for now necessarily. And it's very interesting, but what I love so much about this is our main character perspective, her point of view. She is so interesting and fascinating of a character. She is, wow. I can't explain how this book touched me, how much it impacted me, how much it made me think. The main character really talks a lot about what it's like to be a woman in a world who doesn't want to like get married or have a kid, what it's like to care about her career or care about other things. She talks about herself with her own agency, and it's very fascinating to see her like try in this time where it's like still confusing for people to like act like that, to like try to take hold of her life and take reins of her life and move it in the direction she wants to. It's so fascinating, and I love this book. I can't even describe to you how much I loved it and how much it affected me, how it made me feel, and how it made me look at other people in my life who have mental illness in a different way, and how it made me feel personally about my own struggles. And it just like, whew, I don't mean to like get all emotional about it, but I really just like, I love this book. I already want to reread it. So when it comes down to it, I love this book so much that it's hard for me to express in words why and how much I loved it, how much it impacted me, how much like Esther describes herself and her thoughts. Really, it's so fascinating. I really enjoyed this book. I already want to reread it. Clearly my favorite I read this month. Easily my favorite I've read all year. I can't stop thinking about it. I loved it, and I want to buy my own edition. This one in particular, this 50th anniversary with the like purple foil, is beautiful. Anyways, I loved it. 5 out of 5 stars. There are definitely some problematic aspects in here, especially how Sylvia Plath describes race of other people. It's super problematic. But that aside, this book changed me. So those are all of the books I read in the month of February. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I definitely recommend you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I want you to comment down below and let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're planning to soon. That's all for today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!